All right, guys, here is the moment of truth. It's no fun making a newsletter sign up web app if we can only sign up ourselves through localhost, right? So let's deploy our web app so that we can send anyone the link and they can access our server to sign up to our newsletter and get rid of this localhost business. Now, because we're no longer just deploying static websites, we can't use GitHub pages or any servers that only support static content. And unless we want to build our own server stack and live with noisy servers running 24/7, and believe me, it's really noisy and it's really hard. I've done this before and it's a lot of fun, but nobody will ever want to live with you unless you're in Iceland or something. So buying and setting up your own servers is a lot of work because you need to keep it running 24/7, you need to maintain the software and solve any problems that you come across, and there's a lot of problems. So instead, we're going to rent some servers from somebody else so they can have all of the hassle and all of the pain of keeping our servers up and making sure that people can access it over the World Wide Web. So some of the best people who provide this service is Heroku. And the best part is they let you rent their servers for free. So you can create up to 5 projects for free with them, and they will host your server to keep your website live on the internet. And once your app gets popular and you have lots and lots of requests to your server, then you can scale it up dynamically with Heroku, pretty much just by using a slider bar. And immediately you can get access to more servers who can respond to requests from more browsers. And this is when you've made it in the world and you've become Pokemon Go or some huge hit. They can support your success as well. And only at that stage do you start paying them for that privilege. So obviously the first step is signing up for their services, and you don't have to provide a credit card, and it's completely free to sign up. So if you haven't got a Heroku account, then sign up right now. And once you have done, then you can go ahead and log into your account and you will land on your dashboard. Now, Heroku has really good documentation, which you can find at devcenter.heroku.com. And we can click on the Get Started button to take a look at their step-by-step guides for deploying our first app. So we're going to choose Node.js because that's what our code is based on. And we're going to use their step-by-step guide to upload our code and make our server go live. So the first step is to download the Heroku command line interface. So when you click on it, it should automatically choose for you the right version, be it Mac or Windows or other systems. And once you've gone through the wizard and installed it, then you can begin to use the Heroku command from your command shell. So that's going to be hyper for us. So once it's installed, you should be able to write Heroku login, and you will need to enter your email and password that you signed up to Heroku with. So don't forget those things. Now, once you've authenticated, then we can go ahead and do the other version checks. So for example, you can check for the version of anything you've installed just by writing the item, say Heroku, and you can say -- version. So our Heroku is currently up to date and it's running 7.0.41. Now the next thing is that they're saying that this tutorial will work for any version of Node greater than 8. So we can check that our Node version is greater than 8, and it is. It's 8.11.1. So perfect. Now, the other thing is that NPM is installed with Node. So let's make sure that we've actually got NPM. So we can say npm-version. And of course, if you have a version, then that means that this item is obviously installed. The last thing to check is Git, and to make sure that we've installed Git. And if you haven't, you can simply click on this link and you can go ahead and download for your system and install it. So we're going to be covering Git and GitHub in a lot more detail in the next module. But at the moment, we're just going to use this tutorial to have everything up and running. And once you've checked all 3 of these and everything's ready to go, then we can click and confirm and go to the next step. So the next step is to prepare prepare our app. So in their case, they're asking you to use their sample app, which is something that they've created, and you can see the code for it over here. It's got some node code and allows you to test out Heroku. But in our case, we actually want to deploy our current app, which is the newsletter sign up website. So we're not going to follow their steps here. Instead, we're going to prepare our own app. Now, there's a couple of things that you have to do in order to update it so that it will work on Heroku. And the first thing is inside your app.js. Currently, we are listening on a local port, which is the port 3000. Now, once we upload our code onto Heroku servers, then our code will be running on their system, and their server might not want to use the port 3000. So the way that Heroku works is that it might pick and choose a port for you. So to enable this, you have to tap into something called process.env.port, and the port is in caps. So this is basically a dynamic port that Heroku will define on the go. So at any given point, it might decide to deploy your app to port 3000 or 5000 or whatever it is on their local system. So by changing our port to this, it will allow us to work seamlessly with their system. But the problem is that if we try to run this app now locally using localhost, then our computer won't know what this is all about because this process object is defined by Heroku. So what we can do here, if we want to run it both testing locally as well as deploying to Heroku, if we want to do that simultaneously, then we can tell our app to listen on this port for Heroku, but also add an OR to tell it that you can listen on 3000 when we're running locally. So by putting in this as the port, then our app will work both on Heroku as well as our local system. So now that we've set that, let's go ahead and hit save. And before you deploy your app to Heroku, just make sure that you've tested it locally. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna spin up my server with NodeMon. And now I'm going to head over to my port localhost 3000, and let's just check that everything is still working as it should. So this is why we need to test, because once it's up on Heroku, it's a little bit more time consuming to change the code and to relaunch it. So this is why we need to test it while we have our console and our logs. So it's currently going to the failure path. And the reason is because I've still got my body commented out when I was testing the failure route. So this is really important that you test your app before you go ahead and deploy. So let's save that change and let's try again. And let's just make sure that we get to the 200 route before we start deploying. And the next thing that we have to change is we need to create a proc file. This is the file that Heroku is going to check to see how to launch your app. Now, currently, we've been launching our app with NodeMon just so that it's constantly refreshing in the background and updating any changes. But normally, we would run our app using the command node and then the name of our server file, which in our case is app.js. So in order for Heroku to figure out what command to run in order to launch our app, we need to specify this in this format. We need to say web : which is the process type, and then the command that we need to use in order to launch our app. So let's go ahead and add this to our site. So I'm going to CD over to our project, which is currently, in my case, under desktop/newsletter signup. And then once I'm inside this project directory, then I'm going to create this proc file. Now, it's really important that if you read their documentation on procfile, it can't be named something like procfile.txt. It just has to be called procfile with no extensions. And it has to be spelled exactly the same way with P capitalized. So just make sure that you're careful when you type this in and when you create this file. So now that we've created this file, let's go ahead and open it. And let's right click to open it using Atom. And inside here, we're going to type web : and then it's how we're going to start our process, which is going to be node app.js. So this is all that we need to tell Heroku how to launch our app and also which file actually contains our server code. So sometimes you might decide to name this index.js or app.js or server.js, and Heroku doesn't know which it is that you want to use. So it's important to add this file and this line. So now that we've done that, we are ready to go. So let's head back to the command line. And the next step is to save our work to Git. So in order to do this, the first thing is to make sure that we are in the right place. So make sure that this part, which comes after your laptop's name, is at the location of your project. So this should be the project folder's name. If it's not, then make sure that you CD to it. And remember that you can drag and drop folders into Terminal so that it will navigate to that address. And that address has to be the folder that contains all of your package.json, node modules, and app.js. So this is the project folder, and we've confirmed that we are at that position. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say git init. And this will initialize a brand new Git repository. Now, Git is a swear word in English, but it's also a way of allowing you to save all the different versions of your app or your code. So remember when you used to write essays in high school or for college, you would save the essay and you would say essay final. And then you realize that there's some changes, and then it becomes essay final. And then it gets to essay final for real, essay definitely final. And at some point it just gets out of control and you don't know which one's actually final. This has happened to me so many times. But Git and version control allows you to save each and every time point of your work. So it's almost like having time machine for all of your projects so that you can roll back to any time in the past and you can create experimental branches and mess around with your code. And there's going to be all of that goodness that's coming up in the next module. But for now, we're going to use Git and we're going to add all of our files that are in this current repository. So that's been added to our version control. And the next step is we're going to commit our changes to this current version. So this keyword means that we are starting a new version, say version 3, or in our case it's actually version 1, because we haven't been committing all of our changes. And we can also get to add a message by adding the M flag, so -M. And then we're going to specify a string, which is our message. So we're going to say first commit, or any message you wish, and then we're going to hit enter, and all of our files and everything gets committed. So now that we've done that, we are in sync with the tutorial and we can go to the next step. Now, the next step is to deploy this app, and they want you to create a new app on Heroku using the keyword Heroku create. Now, at this stage, you have to be logged in order for this to succeed. If you aren't, it'll ask you for your Heroku password and username again. But if everything looks green and blue and not red, then that means everything's working fine. So now they've created your brand new container. So your brand new server has been created at this address, https://saltytor herokuapp.com, and you can check it out by just clicking on it. And you can see this is welcome to your new app, but it doesn't have any content yet because we haven't pushed it over. So let's continue with their tutorial. The final thing that we have to do before we can get our app live is to write git push Heroku master. And this will push our local version that's been stored using Git to Heroku. So let's try it out. Git push Heroku master. And that will take a little bit of time of uploading all of our local files relating to our Node app. And it will send that to Heroku's servers on the internet. And once it's done, it will show you verifying deploy done. And we can access it at the previous location that we had. So let's refresh this page, and just a word of warning, you might get an application error when you try to load up this site immediately. Now, it's important that you give Heroku just a few minutes for it to set up all of this fancy, complicated stuff for you behind the scenes, and come back to it maybe after 5 or 10 minutes. So this is our moment of truth. Let's go ahead and test our app that is running on the web and see if this works. So I'm going to click sign me up. Awesome, you've been successfully signed up to the newsletter. And if I refresh on my MailChimp, then I can see that my latest person has been added from a live and up and running website. So if you've gotten to this point and everything is working just as it is, then it's time to really pat yourself on the back, because we did a lot of really complex things just now in this module. And without tools such as Heroku or Node or Express or Request, we would have spent a month or two writing the code and then maybe another 2 months building our own server stack. So this is really, really cool what we have done. But if you had any problems doing any of that, make sure that you check the Heroku logs, and it will usually give you an indication of what might have gone wrong. So for example, say if I forgot to change the port to process.env.port, then you might end up with a page that looks something like this. And in that case, of course, it's going back to the Heroku logs, which will help you. Then it'll say something like web process failed to bind to port within 60 seconds of launch, stopping process, state change from starting to crashed, and it tried starting again, but then process ended and it didn't work basically. And essentially it's trying and trying again, but it can't bind to the port that Heroku needs to bind it to. And that's all because of forgetting this step. And in other cases, you might have forgotten to add a proc file, or you might have misspelt the proc file, or you might have not added the actual name or your server, or you might have some typos here. And again, you will see the crash logs in the Heroku logs by using the Heroku logs command. So this is really, really helpful to diagnose what might have gone wrong. But once you are done and you have completed your app, then updating your app is as simple as going into here, making some changes. So for example, let's change our success page to brilliant instead of awesome, because awesome is really awesomely overused. And in order to push those updates to Heroku, all you have to do is again use git add to add your changes, git commit to save this current version. So this current version is different because I changed the success page H1. And now I can again do git push to Heroku master, and that will update my website with the changes. So that includes the change to the H1 in the success page. So now once that is done, I can head over to my website to go and check it out. And because this is no longer running on the local host, I can share this URL with anybody and they can sign up to my newsletter. So this is a good time to mention that if you want to sign up to the App Brewery's newsletter, then be sure to head over to appbrewery.co/p/newsletter. And we only send this out once a month so that we can collect all of the best stuff that happened during the month. And we'll send you this short and sweet newsletter that will hopefully teach you 5 new things every month about programming, design, startup, cool new tools to try, and also the app showcase of the best things that our students have built in this month. So that's just a little plug from me. I hope you enjoyed building this awesome project. And in the next module, we're going to be looking into GitHub and Git to learn much more about version control and how all of this magic actually works. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next module.